Welcome back to our exploration of ethical behavior and the 5 fundamental principles of conduct. Let's move on to 3. Objectivity. Objective means to act without bias, to remain neutral, and not favor one party's interests over another. To be more specific, objectivity can be divided into 3 things. A. Free of bias. B. Free of conflict of interest, and C. Free of undue influence by others. The first one, free of bias, we've already covered under fair. Don't forget, fair means no cheating, no bias, no self-interest. But let's delve a little deeper and define bias. To be biased is to be in favor of one thing, person, or group compared to another. We all have our own biases, preferences that influence our judgment and prevent us from being fair. They might be conscious biases. That means we are aware of them. I, for instance, love red. I mean, it does not really matter what I'm buying. If it's red, I'm more likely to buy it, just because it is red. It's crazy, but true. I am totally biased. I favor that color. I can feel it pulling at me when I see something red. So I have to guard against this bias because it leads me to buy things that I don't need. More dangerous is an unconscious bias, biases that happened outside of our awareness. For instance, rejecting an applicant for a job that you have available because of an unconscious bias happens frequently and without us even being aware of it. We often justify our unconscious biases through rationalization, such as, oh, this individual wouldn't be a good fit for our organization. But we have to be aware that it is our unconscious bias that is the driver behind our choices. That's why we always have to guard ourselves against biases, both conscious and unconscious. It makes sense that free of bias is part of objectivity because a synonym for objective is fair. So objective and fair mean the same thing. Wait a minute. Don't forget that fair also means without self-interest, without trying to get the advantage for ourselves. This refers to B, free of conflict of interest. So what is a conflict of interest? The best way to demonstrate it is using an example. Assume you're a doctor who has just bought shares in a company that produces a specific ADHD medication. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's a mental disorder which mainly affects children and teens, and it's often treated with medication. You, as a doctor, now prescribe for all your ADHD patients only the medication produced by the company you've invested in, even when other ADHD medication produced by other companies works better for some of your patients. A conflict of interest occurs when the decisions we make may give us an unfair advantage, benefit us in some way, shape, or form. How could a doctor avoid this conflict of interest? The doctor recognized that they might have a self-interest and to guard themselves against it. Let's do another example. Say we are a financial advisor and we can recommend 2 different mutual funds for our clients. One of the funds would pay us a management fee that is higher than the other mutual fund. We now have a conflict of interest because recommending the mutual fund paying the higher fees to us follows our self-interest and would give us an unfair advantage. It does not even matter if the mutual fund with the higher fees might be a better fund. There would still be a perceived conflict of interest. What does that mean? A perceived conflict of interest. It means that if a reasonable outsider had knowledge of all the facts in the situation and they studied them carefully, they would conclude that there is an unacceptable likelihood that a conflict of interest exists. So, the measure of whether a conflict of interest exists or not is from the viewpoint of an outsider looking into the situation. Accountants have to avoid not just the actual conflict of interest, but the perception of a conflict of interest. Let's move on to C, free of undue influence of others. One of the threats of objectivity is pressure or influence by another party. Again, an example would best describe what undue influence means. In the 1955 version of the movie Miracle on 34th Street, an old man going by the name of Kris Kringle is hired to play Santa in Macy's annual Thanksgiving Day parade. Mr. Kringle proves to be such a hit that he is hired as the store Santa for Macy's main store in Manhattan. When Mr. Kringle claims that he really is Santa Claus to the store's psychologist, it leads to a court case to determine his mental health and, more importantly, whether he is or is not really Santa Claus. Watch this scene and see if you can recognize the instances of undue influence.
A judge is going to be asked to sign papers committing you to a mental institution. The only chance would be to prove you legally sane at a public hearing.
What? I can think of nothing better. Don't you see? That will settle the question once and for all.
Do you solemnly swear the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning. You may proceed, Mr. District Attorney.
My name's Thomas Mara. What's yours?
Kris Kringle.
Oh. Where do you live?
That's what this hearing will decide.
It's a very sound answer, Mr. Kringle.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Tell me, do you really believe that you're Santa Claus?
Of course.
The state rests, Your Honor.
In view of this statement, do you still wish to put in a defense, young man?
I do, Your Honor. I'm fully aware of my client's opinions. In fact, that is the entire case against him. That Mr. Kringle is not sane because he believes himself to be Santa Claus.
An entirely logical assumption, I'm afraid.
Not necessarily, Your Honor. You believe yourself to be Judge Harper, yet no one questions your sanity because you are Judge Harper.
Mr. Kringle is the subject of this hearing, not me.
Exactly. So I intend to prove that Mr. Kringle is Santa Claus. Your name, sir?
R.H. Macy.
Do you recognize this man?
Yes, he's an employee of mine, Kris Kringle.
Do you believe him to be of sound mind?
I certainly do.
Mr. Macy, you're under oath. Do you really believe that this man is Santa Claus?
Do you?
I do.
That is all.
Your Honor, there is no such person as Santa Claus, and everybody knows it. I ask that the court make an immediate ruling. Is there or is there not a Santa Claus? This court will take a short recess to consider the matter.
I don't care about the law. I'm talking about politics. You go back in there and rule that there's no Santa Claus, we won't be even able to put you in the primaries.
Charlie. I'm a responsible judge. How can I seriously rule that there is a Santa Claus?
All right, go back in there and rule there isn't. The kids read about it, so they don't hang up their stockings. So what happens to all the toys that are supposed to be in them stockings? Nobody buys them. Oh, the toy manufacturers are gonna love that. What about the Christmas card makers, the candy companies? Oh, boy, are you gonna be a popular guy. And what about the Salvation Army? They got a Santa Claus on every corner. Henry, I'm telling you, if you go back in there and rule that there's no Santa Claus, you can count on getting just 2 votes. Your own and their district attorneys out there.
One, District Attorney's Republican.
The court will rise.
This court has just consulted the highest authority available. The traditions of American justice demand a broad and unprejudiced view of such a controversial matter. And therefore, this court is determined to keep an open mind and hear the evidence from either side.
But can my opponent produce any evidence in support of this contention?
Your Honor, I can. Will Thomas Mara take the stand?
Who, me?
Thomas Mara, Jr.
Thomas Mark.
Hi, Daddy.
Tommy, you know the difference between telling the truth and telling a lie, don't you?
Everybody knows you shouldn't tell a lie, especially in court.
Do you believe in Santa Claus?
Sure I do.
And what does he look like?
There he is, sitting over there.
I object, Your Honor.
Overruled. Tommy, why are you so sure there's a Santa Claus?
Because Daddy told me so. Didn't you, Daddy?
And you believe your daddy, don't you?
Sure I do. Daddy wouldn't tell me anything that wasn't so. Would you, Daddy?
Thank you, Tommy.
Bye, Daddy.
The state of New York is willing to concede the existence of a Santa Claus. But I ask that Mr. Gailey produce authoritative evidence that Mr. Kringle is the one and only Santa Claus.
Your point is well taken, Mr. Mara. Mr. Gailey, are you ready to show that Mr. Kringle is Santa Claus? On the basis of competent authority? Not at this time, Your Honor. I ask for an adjournment until this time tomorrow. This court stands adjourned till 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
It was really clear that the judge was under undue influence, pressure from an external party on the decisions of another. But you could also see that the prosecutor was under undue influence by the wishes of his son. If external pressures exist, it becomes difficult or even impossible to continue to be objective. It is for that reason that objectivity requires all three of the following: free of bias, free of conflict of interest, and free of undue influence by others. We'll continue our exploration of ethical behavior and the 5 fundamental principles of conduct in our next video.